Welcome to Tracy's Terrors. My name is Tracy, and if you love horror fiction and you appreciate smart animal commentary, then you are in the right place. Today, Strigoi, VamPullet, and I are going to be discussing the 1964 novel Day of the Arrow by Philip Loraine. Now, Philip Loraine is a pseudonym for a British author named Robin Estrich. Day of the Arrow exemplifies the principles of folk horror. Before I get into the plot summary and the analysis, though, I want to give a little bit of context about how I found the book. Again, it was written in 1964, published in 1964, and I discovered it, I don't know, just last month on the Valancourt website, on the Valancourt book catalog. Great publishing house. So it's, I want to say, a little bit obscure, not as well known as I think it should be. Now, of course, it's 2024. I, like most horror fans, have already seen that folk horror classic, The Wicker Man. I've also watched, Ben Wheatley's films in that category. I've read Harvest Home. I've read Adam Neville's novels, The Reddening in particular, good example of folk horror. All of this is to say that I, again, like many horror fans, am already familiar with how a folk horror plot goes. There's land, it is controlled by pagan gods, and in order for that land to be fertile, these pagan gods demand blood sacrifice every now and again. And Day of the Arrow closely conforms to this pattern, to these expectations. And what makes it seem, a little bit more predictable is that there is this unusual and very thick foreshadowing. So even if you didn't know how a folk horror plot goes, it pretty much tells you in the beginning what's going to happen. So you're probably thinking, why am I recommending this book from 1964 that for the modern reader is kind of boring and predictable? Why am I doing that? Because it's not boring. It's actually very exciting and very sexy. The representations of sexuality in this book are very risque, even by 2024 standards. It's a kind of paint in place where, you're wondering who's sleeping with whom, and there's sexual tension that expresses itself in weird subtext, and it makes it kind of a page turner. It also explores serious ideas. It isn't all sex and pleasure and titillation. It considers epistemological issues of belief and truth, and explores, arbitrary hierarchies of truth claims. And the other issue that it looks at that I thought was really interesting is the power of coercive architecture. It offers almost an alternative explanation for possession that isn't supernatural. It looks at how architectural design can dictate human behavior, and I thought that was kind of an interesting subject. So I want to get into the plot summary. Strigoi, VamPullet, are either one of you ready to go with that? Neither one of you have a plot summary ready? I guess it's just me. Day of the Arrow takes place in France, first in Paris and later in a rural mountainous region. Our main character is James Lindsay, and James is a Scottish painter in his 30s. He's staying in a Parisian hotel, a little bit dingy, and he runs into his old lover, his former lover, Francois, as she's exiting a hotel room with a man who is not her husband. She is having an extramarital affair, and he's caught her. Now, Francois has kind of gone up in the world since her relationship with James. She's married Philip, the Marquis of Black, and she is now the Marquise of Black. She talks to James and justifies her extramarital affair by saying that Philip, her husband, has not had sex with her in like 3 years. So, what is she supposed to do? Of course she's going to have an affair. And what's worse is that while they used to be a real globe-trotting couple, always traveling, Philip now refuses to leave his ancestral estate, which is very hard on Francois, who's a cosmopolitan woman. What's even worse than that is that Philip seems to be convinced that he is going to die soon. He hasn't explicitly stated this to Francois, but with her wifely intuition, she senses it. So she persuades James to go to Black to try to figure out what is wrong with her husband. Why isn't he having sex with her? Why is he isolating himself at the estate? Why does he think he's going to die? James is motivated to do this because he wants to rekindle his relationship with Francois. But also, Philip is his old friend. They were college roommates, and he's curious about what's going on with him. So when he gets to Balak, Philip explains to him that the grape harvest has failed for 3 consecutive years. The vines have been destroyed by blight, and now the food crops are also being destroyed by disease. His people are struggling and they need him to fulfill his duty, which he is ready to do. He's going to fulfill his ancestral duty, but he's not really clear on what that duty is. James is confused by Philip's talk of duty, blood, sacrifice. He doesn't know what he's talking about, but he is getting the sense that maybe Francois is right and Philip is in some kind of danger. So to try to figure out the nature of the threat, he delves into Philip's family's history. And he also talks to other guests at the chateau. So while this is happening, eccentric guests are showing up at the chateau in preparation for a very significant rural festival, a festival that's very important to the people of Balak. So as the day of this festival draws near, the sense of menace and tension grows. And the question is, can James figure out what is going on and save Philip? That's the plot summary. Now, Strigoi wants to begin by talking about the foreshadowing because it is very unusual, and I think he's right. I think that's a good place to start. Now, the foreshadowing in this novel is about as subtle as a neon sign. We have an omniscient narrator, so this narrator knows what's happening in all of the characters' heads, knows what happened in the past and in the future. And whenever Philip says something cryptic about his ancestral duty and blood and sacrifice, this narrator comes in and says that James would remember this statement to his dying day. He would never forget what Philip said at that moment. And so you are encouraged to put the most ominous and the darkest and the most fatalistic interpretation on anything that Philip says. And if James is in a situation where the clues to the mystery are present, this narrator says everything James needed to know was right in front of him, but he didn't know it at the time. So, while most novels will give the reader some wiggle room to use their imagination, to guess, to dream about what's going to happen to the character, here the foreshadowing really closes down all interpretive possibilities. It narrows Philip's horizon and really makes it clear that only one outcome is possible. And so you're probably thinking, as I said before, well then what's the fun in that, right? We know what's going to happen. And I think VamPullet is on to why this book is so entertaining and why you should read it. VamPullet, you are absolutely correct. What keeps us turning those pages, what keeps us reading Day of the Arrow is its Frenchness. And by that I mean the way Frenchness signifies in the British and American cultural imagination. Philip Loraine is a British author, and he imagines the Chateau of Balak as a heavily upholstered playground of debauchery where sophisticates take sexual intrigue and eccentricity as a matter of course. Foregrounding, its thematic preoccupations, the novel opens with an extramarital affair in a seedy hotel. And this affair stirs some complicated emotions for James, who's jealous of this lover. He wants to be in the hotel room with Francois, but he also feels affronted on behalf of her husband, Philip, who is his old friend. And more than that, this affair highlights the triangle of desire that structures this novel. James goes to Balak because he wants to be near Francois, whom he loves, but he also goes because he's in love with Philip, and he says he is in love with Philip. They have a relationship that is not, explicitly sexual, but it is a homosocial bond that is so intense that it rivals the feelings that he has for Francois. So there's a definite love triangle happening here. And the triangle just becomes more complicated, like everything else. It becomes more complicated when he gets to the chateau. There is a young man, an 18-year-old, who is beautiful and precocious, named Christian, and he visits the estate. He engages in some pretty erotic horseplay with the master of the estate, with Philip, and this gets James wondering if Philip is maybe gay. Maybe he's had a change in sexual orientation. He was certainly straight in college, but maybe he's gay now. And he openly, wonders if that's the reason he is no longer sleeping with his wife, Francois. While the book is very sexual, it is not explicit. Everything that is suggested or imagined happens off the page. And what's interesting about that is it allows this kind of sexual energy to leave these off-page spaces and come onto the page, so that every ordinary exchange or conversation has this sexual frisson, and there's a lot of subtext that's fun to decipher. Communication here happens through glances, characters catching other characters' eyes, and it's all seductively indirect, in sharp contrast to the primary thread, which is what happens to Philip. That's a pretty straight line. The sexual relationships are all much more oblique. Yes, I take your point, VamPullet. So the book is not, as she says, it is not all sex and pleasure and titillation. It also takes on heavier issues, questions of epistemology and the relationship between belief and truth. The people of Balak have these very strong pagan beliefs, and does the strength of their belief make it true, make it so? Well, these beliefs do structure major components of their culture, their relationship to their work, to their employer, even their relationship to their leisure time, their festivals. So it's true enough. And Loraine also interrogates kind of arbitrary hierarchies of truth claims. Why are their pagan beliefs any more fantastical than Christian ideas about transubstantiation or the Trinity? Why are the demands of their neo-pagan religion, why are those demands or requirements any more ridiculous than the demands of that secular religion, patriotism? In other words, does it make more sense to die for an abstraction like your country, or to die for a piece of land and for a community of people who have supported and nourished your family for centuries? Why is one death considered more significant than another? So those questions are there, and while they're not, the most original ideas, I think that Loraine's exploration of them adds another thread, adds an extra layer of interest. If for nothing else, I would say read this novel for its exploration of the relationship between architect and behavior. I know neither one of you found this very interesting, but I did. When Philip arrives at the chateau, he finds himself engaging in furtive behavior and conspiratorial thinking, and he concludes that it's the design of the building. It has these shadowed corners and narrow passages and floor-length drapes, and these features invite him to spy on people. They coerce him into listening to conversations, into eavesdropping. He can't resist what it is that the architecture wants him to do. So he becomes deceptive, and he becomes a bit of a liar because the space facilitates it, and indeed even demands it. But what I like about this is it's kind of a non-supernatural explanation of possession. There's no, spiritual reason why his personality changes. It's purely a material one. It is purely, the way this building is shaped that is compelling him to act in certain ways. I like that idea. I wish the novel had explored it just a little bit more. Okay, Strigoi, we are definitely going to talk about the film. We're not going to miss it. We're going to do it next. Now, everything that makes Day of the Arrow an enjoyable read is missing from the 1966 film adaptation Eye of the Devil. In the film, James is gone, and our protagonist is Catherine. Catherine is really Francois from the book. She is Philip's wife. She's the Marquise of Balak. And she's played by Deborah Kerr. In her hands and with this screenplay, this character is no longer a sexually liberated woman motivated by her passions and desires. Instead, she's a very stern, anxious, uptight mother detective figure. There is no former relationship with a Scottish artist. There is no extramarital affair, no same-sex desire. In short, all of the Frenchness has been stripped away. I don't know if you are familiar with the British food product Spotted Dick. It's a raisin cake that is in a can. And I think the movie is as dry and as distinctly British as a can of Spotted Dick. So if you were choosing between the film or the novel, definitely take the novel. I know a lot of people online prefer the film, and I really can't understand why. Overall, I think that the three of us would give this novel a 3.5 stars out of 5. If you enjoyed our discussion of it today, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.